Hey everyone, how's it going today and welcome to another episode. So in the last episode, if you guys are coming from that specific video or haven't checked it out yet, I talked a lot about the dark side to working in civil engineering, civil structural construction engineering, and about a lot of the reasons why deep down inside I sometimes regret going to that industry. But with that being said, I think it's so important that not everything was doom and gloom, and that while things were very dark during the time when I was in a civil environmental structural construction engineering world, there were still some really great things that came out of that industry, and I think it's important to give praise where it's deserved and due. So in today's video, what I really want to do is take a reverse and talk about the opposite side, about several things that I actually deep down inside really loved about civil engineering. And if you are brand new here, a little bit of a background story, quick 10 seconds, is that I'm someone that worked and pursued a career in civil engineering for several years back in the 2010s, if you include my college years and my internships and everything in that time period and era. But I was someone that ended up ultimately leaving civil engineering to pursue other career paths. But what makes my video, I like to think, relatively special is that because most people that you will hear that make these videos are essentially people that have only been civil engineers and nothing else. So while they might love or maybe don't love their career, regardless of their opinion, they don't really have respectfully, and I mean this respectfully, they don't really have a very good basis to compare. But as someone that used to be a civil engineer and is no longer a civil engineer and knows a lot of people in other professions, I like to think that I actually do have some basis to compare about what civil engineering is like with a lot of other professions, which is hopefully what's going to make my particular video relatively unique in that world. But with that being said, let's just get right to this video. But as always, if you guys want to share support, consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell if you guys want to see similar videos like this, or you can decide when you watch to the end. But with that said, let's get started. So to start by maybe talking about the first thing that I really deep down inside loved and miss about my time in civil engineering is probably going to be everything related to the job hunting process. And it's really, the long story short is the application process. Essentially, long story short is that it is really easy to get a job as a civil engineer, at least for most people, if you are someone that went through the 4 years of schooling and graduated out, and certainly compared to a lot of other comparable professions. Compared to a lot of other comparable professions, certainly in industries such as like tech, software, finance, even accounting, media, definitely a lot of other industries, the actual application process to get a civil engineering job, it's really chill and really relaxed compared to those industries. For very strong perspective is that back when I remember getting my very first job in civil engineering, I got that very first job, and it's going to be very hard to believe if you come from the tech world or anything in that particular world, but I got that very first job in a two-step round interview. I believe, if I remember correctly, my very first engineering job in civil engineering, I got it through, one was a phone call interview, which they basically just called you up and you just talked on the phone answering questions for less than 30 minutes. And then the second part was a Skype interview where you had to actually see the person face to face online, and it was through that I got hired, which I was really grateful for, because they gave me my foot in the door into the civil engineering world. None of that like multiple rounds of interviews, BS free labor, take-home assignments, none of that BS stuff that a lot of other industries have to go through. It's a lot easier to get a civil engineering job, and I'd imagine it. I know obviously back in the 2010s we lived through a much better job market, and right now the job market is pretty horrible, but I'd like to think even to this day getting a civil engineering job is still significantly easier than it is to get something like a software or a finance job or anything in that particular world. So that's going to be the first point that I think is really cool. Now, the second thing that I really missed about my time in civil engineering, and this is probably going to be a little bit of an extension about that, but it's really going to be job stability. I think that's another big one. You know, right now, if I remember correctly, I think I was reading an article or some statistics somewhere that they said that with every single year that goes by, civil engineering is actually losing popularity to a lot of other industries that are becoming a lot more popular now. And as a result, enrollment is actually going down, relatively down. I don't want to say it's crashing, but it's not as it once was. I think that's very fair to say. So why do I bring this up is that because if you are someone that is very, very passionate and interested in getting into civil engineering, which I came in for the passion. So I actually pursued civil engineering because I was very passionate about learning about how buildings, bridges, and cool infrastructure was designed at the time period, then this might be something to consider, because a lot of people I know that lost their jobs in civil engineering, if they even lost their jobs to begin with, in most cases, they were able to find a job within the next couple of months, if even. You know, a lot of people I know in civil engineering, because of the job stability, especially if you work for the government, they have a lot of job stability, which is really, really awesome. It's not an industry that's full of cyclical roller coasters such as like tech, where you can be hired through a long process and then suddenly fired at any time, and then suddenly have to go through the whole long application process back and forth. It's not like that up and down roller coaster. Job stability is amazing. It's easy to get a job, certainly compared to a lot of other industries. So the job actual hunting prospects, it's really good, and I like to think that way in this industry. So that's two things that I really, really do miss about it. Now, the next thing maybe to shift, instead of just talking about job hunting, but also to talk about what a civil engineer does in their day-to-day lives that I really miss and love about it, is going to be about the environment and the lifestyle. A little bit about, which is ironic because I know, again, in the last video I talked a little bit about how rough the lifestyle was in civil engineering, but it's that if you are someone that does not want to be behind a desk all day, and I was someone that was that way as well. At the time period, I did not want a job that would cling me to a desk 24/7, that I would just have to stare in front of a computer all day. What's really great about civil, environmental, structural, and construction engineering is that there's a lot of variety in terms of the places that you can work. So what I mean by this is that because compared to a lot of other industries such as like maybe finance, tech, healthcare, where you're either going to be behind a cubicle all day, you're going to be behind a computer all day, you're going to be in a hospital all day, with civil, structural, environmental, construction, engineering, and everything in that world, they do have jobs that you might be behind a desk all day, but they also have a lot of jobs that you can be in the field all day. There's a very, very big variety. I know when I worked in the construction industry as a civil engineer, I think my job was about 50-50. Half of the time I was in the field, half of the time I was in the cubicle. But what was great was that you had a lot of variety. I was able to basically go out to see the projects that I worked on in person, but I was also able to work behind a desk when I wanted to have that comfort, especially if it was like a bad weather day. So having that, big variety of being able to work indoors and outdoors when I wanted to, within means, because again, sometimes you're forced to be in a particular environment, but within means, having that variety, I think was really, really nice. Again, this one depends on you, but I like to think that for a lot of people, variety is very nice to have, especially if the weather actually is very nice. Maybe not today, because right now the release of this video is in the winter, but in general, I mean. So that's another big one. And probably the next and maybe even the last thing that I really want to talk about something that I really miss, but I'm going to really dive deep into this one, is going to be everything related to job fulfillment. This one is a little bit subjective, but I want to think that to the average person that is watching this video, if you have any remote interest in civil and environmental engineering, job fulfillment, at least back in the day, was actually really good, at least for me. But again, this is a little bit biased because everyone becomes, or chooses their profession for different reasons. But for me, at least, as someone that came into civil and environmental engineering and structural and construction for passion reasons, because I actually really deep down inside really enjoyed learning about buildings and bridges and how all these cool infrastructure and highways and tunnels and everything is built and put together. there was a lot of job fulfillment to it. You know, I was able to essentially travel around my city, see buildings pop up. I was able to work on projects, some relatively big name buildings, but I don't know if I should share them. In New York City, we have a lot. I'm based out of New York City. In New York City, we have a lot of major famous buildings, and it's crazy to say that I was able to be a part of some of these famous projects before. But the idea really is that I like to think that to the average person, there is a lot of fulfillment to being able to say that you worked on a project that will hopefully last, and now that you'll be able to walk by and physically feel, touch, and see, and be able to walk by and say that you were a part of for many, many years to come. So if you are someone that's trying to chase a feeling of some kind, you know, an emotion, a fulfillment, a sense of fulfillment, and you genuinely feel passionate about it, I think it is very fulfilling work. And I think that's another big thing that I really deep down inside really do miss about this industry at the end of the day. So the big idea is that at the very, very end of the day, we do still need civil engineers in this world. You know, I know it's not the perfect profession, and it might be a very difficult sell for a lot of people I know, especially today, right now in 2026, and probably for the next couple of years into 2027, 8, 9, and 30. But the idea is that if you are someone that's very interested in becoming a civil engineer, just know is that there are still some really cool things about it. And there's still a lot of things that might attract someone to become a civil engineer. These are certainly driving points that got me to become a civil engineer. Obviously, I'm no longer a civil engineer, for better or worse, but these are things that I also do genuinely sometimes miss about civil engineering. I don't think I miss it enough to want to come back, admittedly, if I have to speak truthfully, but there are some things that if you really do care about the job stability, the application process, which is very important, it is a very important thing at the end of the day, and you want to have that balance and fulfillment, and you generally find this something very satisfying, then it is something that maybe you can really consider looking into to maybe give that balance. But of course, I also talked about the dark side of civil engineering in the previous video, so if you guys haven't seen that, I highly recommend checking that video out after this video. I'll try to put it at the end screen so you guys can see that one. And with that being said, if you guys made it to the end, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, feel free to, you know, maybe like this if you found this relatively satisfying or fulfilling or insightful. Feel free to leave a comment down below about your personal thoughts. Would love to hear them, and consider subscribing and hitting the bell for any similar videos like this, or just things in general that I might come out with in the future about self-help, self-care, careers, fulfillment, and all that in that world. So thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.